There's a town on the northern coast where the rain does not simply fall, it arrives. It rolls in off the gray water in long curtains, sweeps over the cliffs, and settles into the bones of the old fishing village like it has always belonged there. The locals call it Holloway Cove, though the road sign at the edge of town has long since rusted into something closer to a suggestion than a name. Every autumn, without fail, the coastal road floods. The single bridge connecting Holloway Cove to the rest of the world disappears beneath brown water for 3, sometimes 4 weeks. The townspeople call it the shut-in season. They stock their pantries. They light their lamps early. They wait. This is the story of what happened during one of those shut-in seasons, of 2 men who were never supposed to meet in a town that was never supposed to keep either of them, until one rainy night brought us together forever. This is a true gay story about healing, about grief, about the terror of loving someone who might leave, and about choosing to stay anyway. If you're here for a heartfelt romance, a slow-burn gay love story, and a coming-out journey that ends in something real, settle in. This one is going to take its time, exactly the way love should. Julian Reyes had not planned on becoming the keeper of anything. At 31, he had a carpenter's hands, rough and sure, and a heart he kept as carefully boarded up as the windows of the old lighthouse he was restoring. He had moved to Holloway Cove 8 months earlier, after his father's funeral, carrying nothing but 2 duffel bags and a set of chisels that had belonged to 3 generations of Reyes men before him. The lighthouse had been his father's dream. Retire early by the derelict tower on Holloway Point, restore it plank by plank, live out quiet years watching ships pass on the horizon. Cancer had taken that dream before his father ever swung a single hammer. So Julian swung it for him. He worked from sunrise until his hands cramped, sanding down 100 years of salt damage, replacing rotted beams, polishing brass fixtures until they gleamed like something worth saving. The townspeople had grown used to seeing him up on the point, a solitary figure against the gray sky, more comfortable with wood and rust than with people. "You're going to work yourself into the ground, Julian Reyes," said Marisol, who ran the general store and had appointed herself the unofficial mother of the entire village. "That tower's not going anywhere. You can let yourself rest. Rest is for people who don't have unfinished business," Julian said, which was as close as he ever came to talking about his father. He liked his solitude. He had built an entire life around it, around the specific, bearable ache of being alone rather than the unbearable ache of losing someone who mattered. His mother had left when he was 7, no goodbye, just an empty closet and a note his father never let him read. His father, the one steady thing in his life, was gone too now. Julian had learned the lesson twice, and twice was more than enough. He did not know, on that particular gray Tuesday afternoon, that the lesson was about to be unlearned. Theo Whitfield had been driving for 6 hours straight, chasing the last usable light of an already dying afternoon, when the rain turned from inconvenience into emergency. He was 29, a photographer with a book deal and a deadline that felt less like an opportunity and more like a noose tightening by the week. His project, Vanishing Coastlines, was meant to document the small towns being swallowed slowly by rising water and corporate buyouts. Holloway Cove was the last stop on his list, tucked so far off the map that his GPS had given up 20 minutes ago. He had exactly 4 days to get his shots and get out before his editors started asking uncomfortable questions about missed deadlines. The storm had other plans. The coastal road narrowed to a single flooding lane, water already lapping at his tires, when his car's engine sputtered, coughed, and died completely. Right in the middle of nowhere, rain hammering the windshield like something furious. No, no, no. Theo pumped the gas uselessly, watched the dashboard lights flicker and fade. Through the sheeting rain, he could just make out a shape ahead, a tall, narrow silhouette rising into the clouds. A lighthouse. He grabbed his camera bag, always first, always instinct, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like an open hand. Rain soaked through his jacket in seconds. He half ran, half stumbled up the gravel path toward the light spilling from a workshop window at the base of the tower, and pounded on the door with a fist gone numb from cold. It opened, and there, silhouetted against warm lamplight, stood a man Theo would spend the rest of his life trying to properly describe. Tall, broad-shouldered, sawdust-caught in dark hair, eyes the color of storm water, watching Theo with an expression caught somewhere between alarm and reluctant concern. "My car died," Theo managed, teeth chattering. "I didn't mean to just show up. I saw the light." Julian looked at him for one long moment. A stranger drenched to the skin, camera bag, clutched his chest like it mattered more than his own safety, and something in his carefully guarded chest gave a small, unwelcome lurch. "You're an idiot for driving that road in this weather," Julian said, stepping aside anyway. "Get in before you catch pneumonia." It was not exactly a warm welcome, but it was, Theo would later realize, the first sentence of the rest of his life. The workshop smelled like cedar shavings and machine oil, warmed by a wood stove crackling in the corner. Julian tossed Theo a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of pine, gestured toward the stove, and went back to sanding a beam like the arrival of a soaked stranger was an everyday inconvenience. "Thank you," Theo said, teeth still chattering slightly as warmth crept back into his fingers. "I'm Theo, by the way." "Julian." A pause, brief and clipped. "The bridge floods this time of year. You picked a bad week to visit." "I didn't exactly pick it. My editor did." Theo managed a small, rueful laugh. "How long until the road clears?" Julian glanced up, and something flickered across his face that Theo couldn't quite read. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Theo's stomach dropped. "Weeks? Welcome to Holloway Cove." Julian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "We don't get many visitors who don't mean to stay." Outside, the storm howled against the shuttered windows. Inside, the silence stretched, awkward and unfamiliar. 2 strangers measuring each other across a small warm room while the whole world seemed to disappear into rain. Theo studied Julian's hands, the calluses, the precision of his movements, the way he handled the wood like it was something worth being gentle with. There was a story in a man who restored lighthouses alone in a town cut off from everything. Theo's photographer instinct stirred, quiet and curious, even as something else, something warmer, less professional, stirred right alongside it. "Can I ask what this is?" Theo nodded toward the half-restored tower visible through the workshop window. "My father's dream," Julian said, and something in his voice closed like a door. "It's a long story." "I've got 3 weeks," Theo said softly. "Apparently." Julian looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since his father's funeral, something in his chest that had been boarded shut for 8 months creaked open, just a fraction of an inch. By the 3rd day, Theo had learned the rhythms of Holloway Cove, the way Marisol's store opened at 7 sharp, the way the fishermen gathered at the pier despite the rain, the way the whole town moved around Julian Reyes like he was a fixed point they'd all quietly agreed not to disturb. He'd taken a room above Marisol's store, paid for with cash and the promise of freelance photos for her window display. But he found himself, every evening, walking the gravel path back up to the lighthouse anyway. "You don't have to keep coming up here," Julian said on the 3rd night, though he'd already set out a second mug for tea before Theo even knocked. "I know." Theo settled onto the sawhorse that had become, without either of them acknowledging it, his usual seat. "I like watching you work." Julian's hands stilled on the brass fixture he was polishing. "There's nothing interesting about sanding wood for 6 hours. There's when you love what you're doing," Theo said quietly. "You do, don't you? Love it." Something in Julian's chest tightened, a familiar warning, the one that told him to close the conversation down, to retreat back into safe, solitary silence. But Theo was looking at him with such open, unguarded curiosity that the warning fell strangely quiet. "My father was going to retire here," Julian said instead, the words coming slower than he meant them to. "Buy this place, fix it up, spend his last years watching ships." He got the deed, never got the years. Theo's breath caught. "Julian." "Cancer." Julian's voice was flat, controlled, the way a man speaks when he has practiced saying a thing so many times the pain has been sanded down to something manageable. 8 months ago, so I'm finishing it. For him. The rain drummed steady against the windows. Theo set down his mug, crossed the small room, and, carefully, like approaching something wounded, laid a hand on Julian's shoulder. "He'd be proud of you," Theo said softly. "Anyone would be." Julian did not pull away. That, more than anything, told him everything he needed to know about how far the walls around his heart had already begun to crumble. Theo began photographing the lighthouse. Not for the book, or not only for the book, but because watching Julian work through his camera lens felt like watching grief transform into something living. He photographed Julian's hands against raw wood, the set of his jaw when a beam didn't fit quite right, the rare, unguarded half-smile that appeared when a piece of brass finally gleamed the way he wanted it to. "You're doing it again," Julian said one afternoon, not looking up from his work. "Doing what?" "Photographing me instead of the lighthouse." Theo felt heat climb his neck. "The lighthouse doesn't have interesting hands." Julian huffed something that was almost a laugh, a sound so rare, Theo would later swear he remembered its exact pitch for the rest of his life. "Show me," Julian said. Theo hesitated, then crossed the workshop and held out his camera. Julian's rough fingers brushed his as he took it, and neither of them acknowledged the way the touch lingered half a second longer than it needed to. Julian scrolled through the photos in silence. Dozens of images, himself, unposed, unguarded, caught in moments he hadn't known were being documented. In every single one, he looked like a man who still had something left to give. "I don't usually let people see me like this," Julian said quietly. "Like what?" "Unfinished." Julian handed the camera back, his eyes meeting Theo's for one long, charged moment. "You have a way of seeing people before they're ready to be seen." Theo's heart pounded against his ribs. "Is that a bad thing?" "I haven't decided yet," Julian admitted, and for the first time, he did not look away. Marisol noticed first, the way small-town shopkeepers notice everything eventually. "He hasn't smiled that much in 8 months, she told Theo one morning, ringing up his coffee with a knowing look. "Not since before his father passed." Theo nearly dropped his change. He's letting me document the restoration. For my book. Hum. Marisol's eyebrow arched in a way that suggested she had raised 3 sons and buried one husband and had no patience left for young men pretending not to be in love. "You keep telling yourself that, sweetheart." Theo walked back to his room above the store with his coffee going cold in his hand, Marisol's words settling somewhere deep in his chest. He thought about the way Julian's guarded eyes had softened over the past week. He thought about the careful space Julian left beside himself on the workbench, always exactly wide enough for another person to sit. He thought about the fact that his 4-day trip had become 11 days, and he had made no serious effort to find another way out of town. That night, walking up the familiar gravel path in a lighter rain, Theo found Julian sitting outside the workshop despite the weather, staring out at the dark water where the beam of the not-yet-finished lighthouse would someday reach. "You're going to get soaked," Theo said, settling beside him without waiting for an invitation. "Some things are worth getting soaked for," Julian said quietly, and the words hung between them, heavier than either man was quite ready to name. It happened on the 12th night, when the rain finally eased into something gentler, more like weeping than raging. They sat inside the workshop, a single lamp burning low, and Julian, 3 cups of chamomile tea into an evening neither of them wanted to end, finally let the last wall crack open. "My mother left when I was 7, he said, voice barely above the crackle of the wood stove. "No note, no would-be. My father raised me alone after that, and he never once complained, never once made me feel like a burden. He was the only person who never left." Theo said nothing, letting the silence hold space for what was coming. "And then he got sick," Julian continued, "and I watched the one steady thing in my life disappear too, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but this lighthouse in my own 2 hands. He looked up, and his eyes, usually so carefully composed, were bright with something raw. "So forgive me if I don't exactly trust good things to stay." "Julian." Theo's voice was gentle, unhurried. "I'm not your mother, and I'm not leaving because things got hard. You have a deadline," Julian said. "A book, a life somewhere else. In 3 weeks, that bridge clears and you'll drive away, and this would just be a story you tell people at parties." The photographer who got stranded with the lighthouse guy. The words landed harder than Julian intended, and he saw them land. Saw Theo flinch, saw hurt flash across his face before he could hide it. Is that really what you think this is? Theo asked quietly. Julian didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. What Julian didn't know, what Theo had never said out loud to anyone in Holloway Cove, was that he understood the fear of being left better than Julian could imagine. I was with someone for 4 years, Theo said finally, staring into the dying fire rather than at Julian. Marcus. He wanted a life that stayed in one place. A house. A routine. And I loved him, I did, but I couldn't stop taking assignments, couldn't stop chasing the next vanishing coastline, the next story that needed telling before it disappeared forever. He swallowed hard. He told me I loved my camera more than I loved him. And the worst part is for a long time, I thought maybe he was right. So he left. And I told myself it was fine, because at least I hadn't been the one to break something by staying too long in one place and getting comfortable. Julian's expression shifted, something in his guarded eyes softening into understanding. So when you say I have a deadline and a life somewhere else, Theo continued, voice thick, you're not wrong that I'm scared of it. But you're wrong about why I keep coming back up this path every single night. I'm not counting down the days until the bridge clears, Julian. I've stopped counting altogether. The rain had gone quiet outside, leaving only the crackle of the stove and the sound of 2 men finally, carefully, telling each other the truth. Then what are you doing? Julian asked, voice barely a whisper. Theo looked up, eyes bright, honest, unguarded in a way Julian had never let himself hope for. I'm falling in love with a man who fixes broken things, Theo said, and hoping, for the first time in years, that maybe I'm one of them. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The lamp flickered low, throwing gold light across the space between them, a space that had been shrinking night by night, ever since the storm first threw them together. Julian. Theo's voice was barely a breath. Tell me if I'm wrong. Julian's hand found Theo's across the small distance, calloused fingers threading slowly, deliberately, through his. His heart pounded so loud he was certain Theo could hear it. You're not wrong, Julian whispered. He reached up, fingers gentle against Theo's jaw, and for a moment, neither man breathed. The rain had softened to a whisper against the windows. The wood stove crackled low. 8 months of careful, guarded solitude cracked wide open in Julian's chest, and instead of the devastation he'd always feared, there was only warmth. Can I? Theo started. Julian answered by closing the last inch of distance himself. The kiss was soft, unhurried, tasting faintly of chamomile tea and salt air, a kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like something that had been quietly building since the moment a soaked stranger knocked on a lighthouse door 12 nights ago. Theo's hand curled against the front of Julian's shirt. Julian's fingers slid gently into damp, dark hair. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, both men were smiling, small, disbelieving, entirely unguarded smiles. So, Theo murmured, still think this is just a story I'll tell at parties? I take it back, Julian breathed, every word. The days that followed unfolded slower and sweeter than either man had let himself imagine. Mornings they worked side by side on the lighthouse, Julian sanding beams while Theo, camera set aside, learned to hold a hammer steady under careful instruction. Afternoons, they walked the cliffside path, hands loosely linked, while Theo pointed out shots he wanted to capture and Julian pointed out which tide pools held the best sea glass. Evenings belonged to the workshop, the wood stove, and each other. Long conversations that stretched past midnight, soft laughter that filled a space that had been silent for far too long, gentle touches that asked permission and were always, always granted. I used to think love was something that happened to other people, Julian admitted one evening, Theo's head resting against his shoulder. Something that always ended in someone walking away. And now? Theo asked. Now I think maybe I just hadn't met the right person to stay for. Theo lifted his head, eyes soft in the lamplight. For what it's worth, I've photographed 100 vanishing towns. I know exactly what it looks like when something beautiful is about to disappear. He pressed a gentle kiss to Julian's jaw. This doesn't feel like that. This feels like something just beginning. Marisol, watching them walk hand in hand past her shop window one gray morning, simply smiled and said nothing at all, because some things, in a small town that had seen its share of hard winters, didn't need saying. The bridge cleared on the 22nd day. Exactly as Julian had predicted, the brown floodwater finally receding to reveal the gray asphalt beneath. Theo's editor had been calling for a week, voicemails growing sharper, more insistent. Vanishing Coastlines needed its final chapter. The publisher needed pages. Real life, patient for exactly as long as a flooded road demanded, had finally caught up. Theo found Julian on the lighthouse gallery, the newly restored railing gleaming under a rare patch of afternoon sun, and felt his chest tighten with a fear he thought he'd already let go of. The bridge cleared, Theo said quietly. Julian didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his eyes were carefully composed again, the same guarded expression Theo remembered from that very first stormy night. "I know," Julian said. "I saw the news truck already setting up at Marisol's." "Julian, you have a deadline." Julian's voice was steady, but his hands, gripping the railing, were not. "A book. A life somewhere else. Just like I said that first night." Theo crossed the gallery in 3 quick strides. "Don't you dare use my own words against me. Not after everything. I'm not trying to trap you here, Theo." Julian's composure cracked, just slightly, grief and fear bleeding through. "I watched my mother leave. I watched my father get taken from me by something I couldn't fight. I don't know how to watch you drive away, too. So maybe it's easier if you just what?" Theo's voice rose, equal parts hurt and fierce. "Push me out the door before I can leave on my own?" "Julian, look at me." Julian looked at him. "I am not your mother," Theo said, each word deliberate, unshakable. "And I am not leaving. But I do have a book to finish and a life to figure out how to build, and I want to build it here. With you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving gently through the newly repaired lighthouse gallery, and 2 men standing close enough to feel each other's heartbeat. "You'd give up your career for a town that floods every autumn?" Julian asked, voice thick with disbelief. "I'm not giving anything up." Theo reached for Julian's hand, lacing their fingers together with a certainty that surprised even himself. "I'm choosing something. There's a difference. My editor doesn't need me in some city apartment to write this book. She needs the story, and Julian, this town, this lighthouse, this is the best story I've ever been given the chance to tell." Julian's breath shook. "And when the next assignment comes, the next vanishing coastline that needs documenting, then I'll go, and I'll come back," Theo said softly. "That's what love actually looks like, Julian. Not never leaving. Choosing to come home." Something in Julian's chest, the last board nailed across the last window of his guarded heart, finally, gently, came loose. "My father used to say the whole point of a lighthouse," Julian said slowly, "is that it doesn't chase the ships. It just stays lit, steady, so that whoever's out there finding their way home always has something to come back to." He reached up, cupping Theo's face in both hands. "Be my ship, Theo. Go where you need to go. But let me be the light you come back to." Theo's eyes filled with tears he made no effort to hide. Every single time he whispered, "For as long as you'll have me." They kissed there on the lighthouse gallery, framed by gray sky and the first real patch of sunlight Holloway Cove had seen in 3 weeks. A kiss that tasted like salt air and second chances, like a promise neither man intended to break. 6 months later, the lighthouse stood finished. Every beam sanded, every fixture polished, the great glass lens finally turning its slow, steady beam out over the dark water each night, exactly as Julian's father had once dreamed it would. Theo's book released that spring. The final chapter, titled simply The Town That Kept Me, featured 40 pages of photographs. Julian's hands against raw wood, the lighthouse rising against storm clouds, and one image, printed in soft black and white, of 2 men standing together on the gallery under a break in the rain, foreheads pressed together, unmistakably in love. Theo still traveled. Smaller trips now, careful and deliberate, always with a return date circled on the calendar, hanging in the kitchen of the small cottage they'd bought together at the edge of town. And every single time, no matter how far he'd gone, he came home to find the lighthouse beam sweeping steady across the water, and Julian waiting at the door with tea already brewing and a smile that no longer needed guarding. "You know," Julian said one evening, the two of them tangled together on the porch swing, while autumn rain began its familiar rhythm against the roof. "The town's going to flood again soon." "I know." Theo pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "I already told my editor I'm unreachable for a month." Julian laughed, full and warm and unguarded, the sound of a man who had finally, fully let himself be found. "Good," he murmured against Theo's hair, "because it turns out I've grown rather attached to being stranded with you." Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and gentle, over a small coastal town where two broken, guarded hearts had somehow found their way home to each other. Proof that sometimes the very storm you're running from is the one that finally brings you exactly where you're meant to be. One rainy night brought us together forever. And every rainy night since has only proven it was always meant to be true. Visitors to Holloway Cove still ask about the lighthouse keeper and the photographer who fell in love during the shut-in season. Marisol tells the story best, usually over coffee, usually with a knowing smile. "Some men spend their whole lives afraid of storms," she says. And then one night, a storm hands them exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. The lighthouse still stands on Holloway Point, its beam turning steady through every autumn flood, every winter fog, every ordinary Tuesday in between. Julian keeps it lit. Theo keeps coming home to it. And somewhere in that small, rain-soaked town, a true gay love story continues. Quiet, healing, and entirely, unmistakably real.